And I think what's really interesting, 100 years ago when our council estate was first built, we were seen as the future of housing and how we could all live better together. As real kind of homes built fit for heroes, a real response to the horror of the Great War. And I think the builders at the time, they had a nickname for Knoll West, which was the 5,000 island forest. So that's 5,000 homes seated on a hill surrounded by greenery. And I think it's really important to remember the kind of poetry and the radical hope that marked the inception of when our estate was built. Because you kind of spin on 100 years later, and when people and outsiders come to our estate now, they don't always see that could be a glimpse of the future again. They kind of look at the high level of deprivation and our kind of crumbling public realm, and they kind of see us as a bit of a problem to be fixed or even demolished and started again. But this film that we're going to have to show you, it kind of shows that Knoll West could be the future of how we want to live better together again, and giving a glimpse of that. So I hope you really enjoy the film, and a couple of shout outs before you see the film. So one is to Ruben and Jamie, saying about who are our filmmakers, and they worked with us to capture and kind of share the story in a way that I know that wouldn't be possible without them. So if you want a film made, talk to Ruben and Jamie, definitely. The second kind of shout out is for, you'll meet them on the film, but Bill, Liam, Tony, John, hello back at home, they're watching at home. They are the true housing pioneers of this whole process. So a big thank you for those. And finally, big shout out to Nationwide Foundation. It's rare to get a funder that sees a little twinkle in your eye and believes in you and sticks with you. Those kind of funders are really rare, so really big respect. So we're going to show you the film. And for those of you who are in the camp of like, that's all very well in practice, but what about the theory? There's also a playbook and a kind of animation that explains the technical model behind it as well. So there we go. Over to that. Homes have never been more unaffordable. Council house waiting lists have never been longer. We're in a housing crisis. We tell ourselves that only big developers can deliver at the speed and scale needed to tackle a crisis this vast. What if things could be different? What if the power and resources to create good homes lay in the hands of our communities? The whole thing has got to change. Let's completely reimagine how we're going to do it and how a community like Knoll West could do housing on its own terms. So WeCanMake is a community-led organisation based here in Knoll West, South Bristol, and we unlock microsites to create affordable homes for local people in housing need. How crazy is it that it's really radical in housing to start with people? Usually things like with sites and how much money can you make out of developing a particular bit of land, whereas WeCanMake starts with people and their housing needs. So our housing pioneers, John, Tony and Bill, I think they've all got different stories about how they got involved with this.
My name is John Bennett. I'm a resident of the WeCanMake collective, I suppose. Someone said to me once, you're only one payday away from being homeless, and I think we all are really. You know, although we can have a bit of money in the bank, you'd be surprised how quickly that gets eaten up once you stop putting money in on a regular basis, you know. Especially in Bristol, it's just got ridiculous. You won't get nothing for less than £500 now in Bristol, and then they're going to put bills on top of that. About 5 years ago now, I was absolutely skint money-wise, and there was no way could I even rent a room in a house. Plus, I still needed to support my family. Both my daughters work night shifts in care homes, so I needed to offer support to other people as well as look after myself. And because of my economic situation, I couldn't really expect a lot more. And I got sort of stuck in that then. I couldn't see a way of getting out of that. I also really lowered my expectations as well. I lived quite a low-level life. I didn't wash that much, and my diet was shockingly bad and got into some bad habits. I got to the stage where I was drinking a lot, drinking most nights, smoking heavily. On the way in, was popping to the off licence to get 6 cans. My target was to get sleep as quickly as possible. I'm going to bed at sort of 7 or 8 o'clock at night, like, you know, just because it was no fun being there. When I got to the first winter, it was very cold, but it was the darkness which depressed me the most, or which got me really down. Especially being a man of a certain generation, there's still that stigma attached to mental health, and so yeah, it was quite depressing. Around about the same time, I bumped into Melissa Mean of Norwest Media Centre. And we were chatting. She said, "Oh, you're a builder, aren't you? You need to get involved with our WeCanMake project. We need builders to get involved." She said, "Well, you're the ideal candidate. We'll put you down as the first resident of WeCanMake."
So we describe our process of development as urban acupuncture. It's a kind of gentle densification, finding the small little sites across the neighbourhood where you can put a new home in exactly where people need it. What we wanted to do is start a different conversation about housing and invite people in. We met Bill through one of those conversations. He understands the pressures of what it is about, you know, not to have a home of your own. Bill and Liam did a really radical, amazing thing, and they were able to help John in a very powerful way.
They were talking to locals with big gardens about a community project where they could either help families move into a house or homeless people to move into a house, and building it from scratch in the garden. I thought it was a good idea. The only condition was that if Liam didn't like the person moving in, it wouldn't happen, because it's his home as well as my own. I just finished a messy divorce and was a single dad with Liam. John was in a similar sort of situation, and I thought I would try and do something that was good for the community, as well as having another neighbour that was close by for safety reasons. If anything ever happened to me, Liam could go out the back door, go to John's. So he came to the house, sat down, had coffee, and talked about what his goals were, what happened within his life, what happened within mine. And Liam thought John was absolutely brilliant. They took together it was like sponge and water. We built it from there. I have been homeless in my life, and it isn't the greatest thing in the world. So to give someone else an opportunity to have a home was a good thing. It was just nice to be nice to someone.
One of our other community pioneers is Tony and her daughter Amancia, and they show how WeCanMake can help with a different kind of challenge.
I was living with my daughter, my mum and my dad, and the space was quite cramped. I only had my bedroom, like we was allowed in the living room, but it was like, it's small enough just for like 2 people, so we used to just either sit in the kitchen, sit upstairs. It's been quite difficult. It took a bit of convincing because my mum loves our garden. Like she liked going out, but then obviously it was just a lot of lawn mowing, and my dad, he didn't want to keep doing the garden, so they decided to take the opportunity. It was a fantastic opportunity. I was really excited.
Because we know exactly who those homes are going to be for, we can absolutely involve them to help co-design what that home is going to be, what it's going to look like. I mean, it's just transformative because they're involved in every stage. We're putting digital fabrication tools and technology in people's hands in our community factory, making the parts for their home.
WeCanMake happen to have a CNC machine, which that's the main machine that's needed. I'm Jonathan Green, I run Block Build. Our sort of approach is to make these manhandleable sized cassettes which act as a structural shell of the building. There's no other material apart from the single type of sheet material in the installation. That's cut out, put together with screws and a mallet, and then they are all sequenced and numbered, so it's super quick and it kind of engages with the community, which is specifically what this project was about.
You get to join in with making your house. So I made the walls in the factory, which was cool. I've never done that before, so I learnt new skills from that.
You know, usually in the development process, the value of new development just washes through the community and gets, you know, kind of hoovered up by a developer. But here, we're making sure that community wealth stays here in the form of jobs, skills, infrastructure.
Seeing Tony in the workshop cut those on a CNC machine out of sheet material, then John putting the fabric of the building together, it was really enjoyable.
It was quite enlightening because I didn't realise how easy it was going to be. I mean, I changed from being a traditional builder to a builder of modern methods of construction. Being involved that deeply, you sort of, it's yours, isn't it? It becomes yours.
It feels like a bit of a family environment, you know, really collaborative.
You went on your own, someone always joined in, or someone always came down to see if I was okay. So that was really nice.
Rather than just trying to build the quickest, cheapest unit, we're actually designing in what people really want from a home. You know, good for people, enough space and light inside, and warm enough and low cost to run. We need to build homes that are good for people and good for the planet.
We're generally saving about 45% of the carbon in a build using our timber cassette system.
We want to push that even further. You know, carbon zero, carbon positive. What's great about working in this way, using the local factory, is that you can transport those parts to site without having to rely on really big trucks. Instead, you can use cargo bikes and the electric van.
On site, they go together, you know, 1 to 100, and it's just kind of like placing Lego bricks.
And then I opened the door for the first time. It's just amazing how it's ended up. I've made more friendships, become more confident, more self-esteem. I'm more independent, so that's quite cool. Amanda's a lot calmer. Yeah, she's brilliant. Yeah, I'm kind of proud to say I'm from North West now.
I always say to people, like, I've just finished building my own house. And I think I can just about get away with saying that. I moved in the day before my birthday. It was that moment like, nah, this is it, I'm in now. But I just felt over the moon. I didn't ever have a vision of it all being in the same room at the same time. When I actually got in there and sat in there and looked around it, I'm really, really pleased with the way it's all come together. I do really feel connected to it. I wasn't really looking after myself very well, but now I'm able to live a much fuller life and a much happier life. It gives me that opportunity to have somewhere to call people in, if you know what I mean, for somewhere to come and visit me. My daughters and my grandchildren, they now see my house is somewhere they can come as well, and they're really proud of it as well. They really like the space. that fills me with pride.
That moment of being welcomed in by John and Tony for the first time into their home when they've got their keys in their hand, that is something very, very special. And it doesn't feel like you're stepping into like a new build off of some like, you know, generic estate. You're definitely stepping into somebody's home.
These homes have been someone's home in their heart from the day they were a line on the page. There's a sense of belonging and well-being even before the walls are constructed, and you can't buy that. So that's why projects like this are important.
I think they're absolutely awesome. The one in my garden should have been there in the beginning. It looks like it just belongs there. It's something that should have been done years ago. You're doing something that will help. It's an idea that is cottoned on within the neighbourhood. Gave me the confidence. I went back to work this year after being unemployed for 8.5 years. There is no real negatives.
I think the WeCanMake project just has so much potential. There's things like the land transfer model, which is, you know, groundbreaking, never been done before. You know, this has the potential really to be scaled up and adapted to other areas across the country on a national level.
Sometimes you look at what we've done. We built 2 homes and you go, oh gosh, that's really quite small. Especially if you look at it compared to the enormity of the housing crisis. But actually, small can be powerful. Small can be really big. We know that there's lots of other communities like Knoll West facing similar challenges to us. And what we've made and discovered here is up for others to adapt and adopt for their own housing situation. And we've got all of the know-how, all of the toolkits, all of the policies, they're there now, so other communities like Knoll West can use them, and they will have it so much easier than we have. Imagine the other neighbourhoods across Bristol, the rest of the country, using the same tools and putting in their 100 homes exactly where they need them. Suddenly you've got thousands of homes, low carbon, community owned, community made. Now that's a revolution I could get behind. That is a demonstration of what this community can do when it works together. That's really powerful. And that's individuals like John, Tony, and Bill, having faith, having trust and going for it, making a different kind of world.
Well, that's going to be hard to follow, but I will do my best. Thank you very much for coming here. My name's Toby Lloyd. I'm going to be chairing the discussion following that amazing film. For those of you who don't know me, I've been knocking around in housing policy circles for far too long. It's about 20 years this year, actually. I was thinking about this on the way in. It's embarrassing. And I started in this area precisely because I thought, you know, I was young and leaving university, and things like solving climate change or world poverty seem really quite daunting and difficult. But, you know, surely we could fix the housing crisis, right? It's not that difficult. It turns out it is actually that difficult. And 20 years later, I've been working hard at it ever since in a variety of different guises. And I can confidently say it's got significantly worse in that time. So, I mean, the obvious conclusion is that I'm totally useless. But the other conclusion is obviously that it is clearly a difficult and intractable, well, possibly intractable problem that we're really struggling as a nation to fix. And so I was wondering kind of why that is. And it's obviously not just for lack of policy. We may have the wrong policies in practice, but it's not for lack of policy. I've produced an awful lot of fantastic policies. Just a few of them. The No Place Left Behind Commission I chaired a year ago came up with, I think it was 54 fantastic policy recommendations for how to make really great community-led regeneration work across the country. Some of which have happened, most of which have not. I see the great Lord Best in the audience here. The Affordable Housing Commission that he led, again, came up with a fantastic set of policies for how we could really turn around the problems of affordable housing in this country. Again, it's not for want of a really good policy. It just, for some reason, we don't seem to be implementing it. Why? We could blame the government, we could blame politicians for just being useless too, and I'm sure there's a fair amount of responsibility there. But we do live in a democracy. We do have lots of opportunities to try and influence government. It can't just be a handful of crap politicians. So so why is it? The best I can do is say that it must be something about the way we talk about these problems. We're obviously failing to persuade government and voters to take on board all these fabulous policies that myself and others have been writing for so many years and actually get them adopted. So something about the language we use and the way we present our policies. And I would recommend here the excellent work that Nationwide Foundation have supported by JRF and frameworks on how we talk about housing. Because I do think there is a problem here. We do tend to immediately talk about crisis and disaster and doom and gloom, and it's all so intractable and everything's so difficult and everything's so awful and it's just getting worse. And then we wonder why people don't feel particularly inspired to get off their asses and help us solve it, or even to believe that it could be solved. Some focus grouping I did years ago at Shelter showed that people regarded their housing problems as really serious, but basically like the weather. It's crap, but that's how it's going to be. There's nothing we can do about it. And that feels to me like a failure on our behalf as policy writers, as activists, as people trying to change things. If we can't convince people, first of all, that it is even possible to change anything, we shouldn't be surprised if they don't seem particularly inspired to follow us. So how we talk about it matters, but then also, it's not just about having slightly better spin in advertising. We have to have the positive, concrete examples that show people that these things are doable. And this is where I think WeCanMake is so inspiring, because it really provides that just practical, workable example of people actually doing something to make new housing possible in a very, very real, tangible, doable way. Most of us don't really imagine we could change the way in which government finances operate to enable the construction of more social housing at scale. Yeah, this is difficult, complicated stuff. It's easy to imagine that is a bit like the weather. But we can imagine that crappy bit of land in our neighbourhood being turned into a useful home for local people. We really can imagine doing this. So I think we need to be using far more of these inspiring, practical, empowering examples of local people actually getting on and doing it. Which is why I'm so delighted that WeCanMake have not only gone out and done this, but are then telling everyone about it. And that's why we're all here now. So I'm going to ask Melissa, first of all, to talk us through a little bit more of the background to the scheme and how it works before we open up to a fantastic panel of different speakers, all of whom have amazing experience of not only writing policy, but also talking about it and even putting it into action as well. So, Melissa, thank you.
Ooh. Just need to put the password in. Maybe the whole world now knows your password, Jonathan, but hopefully not. Here we go, that's me. There we go. So I'm not going to talk very much, but because you've seen far too much of me on that film. But I just want to make a couple of points about scaling WeCanMake. Because now that we've built 2 homes, there's huge pressure, go scale, go massive, go large. And I think it's also, you're often told that the housing crisis is so enormous that it's only the private sector that can be that fast or that big to solve a problem this big. But to misquote Michelle Obama, there is a different way and another way is possible, and that's about the power of small. And you can, I think it's about, you can scale, not just about scaling up, but also about scaling deep. So, in our first 2 homes, because it's much more than just creating a kind of transactional, kind of a financial product to be traded, we're creating homes. And because the way that we've done it, we actually created a kind of quite kind of whopping £375,000 worth of social value from those 2 homes. So that's about local jobs created, the carbon saved, and the kind of things like reduction in level of loneliness and other things. And the second thing is also about scaling. It's not necessarily just scaling up, it's about scaling through breadth and aggregate kind of scaling. So our model is very much about an open source model, and all of our tools are available for others to adapt and adopt for their own situation. So they can create their homes at point of need too. So we've created 2 homes here in the West. We've got in pipeline to develop 150 more in our neighbourhood. And then if you look nationally, there's over 1 million council-bought interwar homes just like the ones in the West. And if you did a similar level of gentle densification in those places, you could create over 30,000 new, affordable, low-carbon, locally made, locally owned homes. So this is a kind of an invitation now. We've done this here in the West, and we want to see how it can spread. So if this feels like this could work in your neighbourhood, if you're a community group or if you're a local authority, then get in touch. We want to see how this ideas can spread, because it really is kind of over to you now. That's great.
Brilliant. Thank you, Melissa. I'm now going to ask Nicholas Boy-Smith of Create Streets to come and give his take.
Thank you very much. And as Toby says, you can't really follow that, so I'm not going to try. That camera I meant to look at. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. 2 words that Melissa used in her brilliant presentation, which I just want to start with, and I'll come back to at the end. One word was unit. How many of you aspire to live in a unit? No. I thought you'd say that. How many of you aspire to live in another word which Melissa used, which is a home? Any of you aspire to live in a home? You need to put your hands up now, otherwise my thing doesn't work. Thank you very much indeed. So, but it's to Toby's point, language really matters here, and how we think about the places we create and the places we continue to live in really, really matters. And it comes. So I can't sure when I'm in and out of microphone or not. So I'm just going to talk for a couple of minutes. I'm just going to sort of step back a bit and look again at the challenges of where we live and housing supply and how the planning and development system works. Because I think occasionally we need to just step back and remind ourselves what some of those challenges are. Then I'm going to look at the good news, and I think there is some good news, and I think this project is very much one of them. I'm going to just perhaps touch on a couple of things I think why potentially this is so important alongside other work that's going on, and then perhaps just end with some challenges perhaps for all of us as to how we think about magnifying this and magnifying similar. So I have to look that way or I'll magnify. It's very, very confusing, this. If I step here, can anyone hear me? If I walk around? I just don't like standing still. It makes me nervous. So just to step back, don't get kidded that we have enough homes in this country. Our increasing number of homes over the last 10 or 12 years is about 0.7% of the overall housing stock. In Europe, as an average, it's been 1.8%. So we're not good at creating enough homes. Our ratio, someone told me the other day that I always use the same pictures in my presentation, so I'm treated them by today by not using any pictures at all. So I'm just going to use some numbers. Our ratio of homes to households, or the number of physical homes we have compared to the number of households, is about the same. So it's about 1 to 1, slightly depending on how you run the numbers. The European average is 1.12. There's give in the system. And you always need give in the system because it's impossible to completely at any one point in time match up all the households, where they want to live and what's available and what isn't. So the fact that I might want a 2-bedroom home in Bristol, and the fact there's a 4-bedroom house available in Sunderland doesn't help me. You need to have a little bit of give in the system just for the constant flow. You need a few more homes than you've got, and we don't. We're absolutely flat, and that's not taking account of probable household formation suppression over the last 20 or 30 years. Lots of things that lots of people will often say are the problem aren't. So it isn't that we have too many empty homes. We've got probably the lowest proportion of empty homes in Europe. It's less than 1% of the stock, and there'll always be some because of that transition. The European average is somewhere between 3, 4, 5%, depending on how you cut the numbers. And I choose my words very carefully here because I might annoy people with what I'm about to say. It isn't even really the lack of affordable or social housing. We do need more social and affordable housing, but that's a symptom, not a cause. Our actual proportion as a proportion of the overall stock is about 18, 19%. The European average is about 11%. So that's not to say we don't need more housing that's affordable and more affordable housing, but underpinning it, we've just not been good at creating enough homes in the right places. And then let's look at the planning system for a couple of minutes. And this goes to the heart, I think, of what the brilliant work Melissa is doing. Lots of things that people say are strange or wrong about our planning system are completely normal. It's completely normal to regulate what we build and how we build it. And a lot of what we do isn't actually that strange. So we probably have we do have more focus on, if you like, local district borough planning versus regional. Quite normal. Italy and Spain have largely regionalised systems. They're pretty much the only countries in Europe that do. We've got a green belt. Well, so do all the countries which have got intense pressure on housing use. Denmark, Netherlands, Switzerland, Belgium, South Korea. Less so in places like France or Germany. Purchase land at unimproved valuations is too tedious to go into in detail, so I won't. But here's the key one. The key thing, as I'm sure you will know, that you need to get to build something in this country most of the time is a planning permission. You also need to get building regs. The key thing you need in most of the world and in most of Europe is a permis de bâtir, a permis de construire, a licenza di edificazione, and I can't do the Italian one, and I certainly can't do the German. It's a building permit. It is not a planning permission, it's a building permit. And the phrase that's often used by developers is really telling. To win planning permission. Just think about that for a moment. To win planning permission. And the reason is, if you look, and my sins have, and so have others, and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and others amongst them, if you look at the nature of the local plan in this country, it sets principles, it sets concepts, but it doesn't actually regulate what you can and can't build. And the consequence of that is profound. And by the way, it's not just me saying this, so the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, the European Union in a study 20 years ago, and others have said the same. Before I get to consequences, I was talking, actually just before Christmas, to an old friend of mine who, like me, married a French girl, but unlike me, moved to France. But my wife had to move to England. He's an architect. He trains as an architect in this country, but he works in France. He runs a large part of the equivalent of a housing association. It's not quite the same, but it's broadly similar. His team can do a feasibility study for a medium-sized site in about an hour and a half. Now, I was hoping you'd look more shocked at that point, but you're just bored. So I apologize for that. But that's... they can essentially spatially mathematically understand what you can and can't do on a site, essentially at no cost, next to no cost, because it's a function essentially of the local regulations. And we're going to come back in now to Melissa's brilliant work in a moment. The consequence of that is a very, very high level of pre-planning risk. And pre-planning risk is very, very expensive, because if you spend the money to win planning permission, that word again, and don't get it, you've just burnt the money. Now, if you're, and this is not to criticise them essentially, if you're Barratt or Barclays or Persimmon or Redrow, you can factor that in, or indeed a pension-funded developer, I'm just looking up to my left, you can factor that into your cost of business and it sort of works. But if you're trying to add a house at the back of your house, or add 2 houses over there, or if you're a local builder trying to turn those 2 semi-detached into 4 terraced, suddenly that risk of winning planning permission, because it doesn't get smaller at the same rate as the development gets smaller. One of the reasons why it's much more efficient to build big in this country is, on the whole, the planning risk. They obviously the planning costs get higher, but they don't get higher in the same proportion as the potential value gets. And we have probably, there isn't data in every country, we don't have data for Albania, we have probably got the most concentrated house building market in the Western world. We've certainly got the smallest proportion of self-build, of custom build, of CLT equivalent or local community groups, building homes and intensifying and densifying existing places. And the consequence, or one of the consequences of that, is we are very, very dependent, not just on a small number of big developers, but we're dependent on the model that they can cope with, which is to go, and to use a technical term, to shit boxes into a field. And that's not how our towns used to develop. Our towns used to develop like this. They intensify. We are in the city of London. Well, we're not in the city of London. We're equidistant between the city and Westminster. Go back to the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries. It was one. Do you need me to stop? Sorry. I said I wouldn't be long. I promised I'd only be a second more. It used to be, 1, 2, 3 stories. It's intensified because a range of individual developers, landowners, small builders have intensified it under a regulated function. It's not new that we created regulation of the planning system. It doesn't date to post-war. The left and the right both get this wrong. The left say, marvellous Mr. Attlee created a planning system, and the right say, evil Mr. Attlee created a planning system, and they're both wrong. The earliest extant regulation of what you can build in this part of London dates from the 12th century. It's something we've always done as urban, as urban civilization. Because if I have home host A and Melissa owns host B, and I put thatch on my house and it burns down Melissa's house, the fact that she can sue me 3 years later probably doesn't make her feel much better. She'd just rather I'd put slate on my roof because it would just be easier for all of us. So the reason that Melissa's work and the work of all the residents in WeCanMake is so important is actually it's pointing, and there are some schemes coming now into the National Planning Policy Framework and into regulation. Increasingly, I think senior officials get this. We need to find ways to turn on self-build, custom build, CLT, small builders, local builders, weird little innovators doing mad things. And that's ultimately the only way we can get back those 2 or 3 million homes that we're probably short of. And if this gets 100,000 homes, that's 5% of that. And that is quite a big amount, actually. I hope that is of some interest. And Toby's sending me messages to sit down, so I'll do so. Thank you. Okay, right. Is that okay?
That's good. Thank you, Nicholas. Imi. Imi Kaur is from Civic Square, and I believe you're going to talk about the role of the neighbourhood in all this.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you so much for having me, everyone, and really excited to be here. And as someone who knows what it might have taken in the background to get to a beautiful 15-minute video like that, a huge shout out to Melissa and the whole team for really being on the ground and building out the what-if question into something that we can all see, feel and touch. I guess I don't really feel like I fit into this room, or like y'all really know a lot about housing, right? Like you really do. And I was like, whoa, okay. So I might just go on a different track, right? And just come with me, because I don't think I've got anything to tell you about housing or architecture that you probably don't already know. This is a little bit of what we've done. And the reason why I've shared this is because I was growing up in the beautiful studio of 00, watching what happens when you put the tools into the hands of people and you ask, couldn't we do this differently? And I just want to say, actually, in all the work we've done, from being a volunteer at the first ever TEDx in Brum to building Impact Hub Birmingham, over the last 7 years of building that and the last 12 years, I can say there is no shadow of a doubt for me. As soon as you make the space, create the invitation, give the tools to people, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people in our streets, in our neighbourhoods, in our cities, deeply passionate about the scale of change that we need to see. And I'm going to ignore some of my slides because I am not going to stick to 8 minutes otherwise. But this is a little bit of us over the last 3 years. If you just want to picture us, we've been building out this idea of what does civic and social infrastructure at a neighbourhood scale look like for the social, ecological and climate transitions we need to make. And we've been prototyping and DIYing this in a neighbourhood called Ladywood in the centre of Birmingham. At the heart of the work that we are doing is this question: what if the climate and ecological transition and the deep retrofit of our streets, our homes, streets and neighbourhoods were designed, owned and governed by the people who live there? I could add loads of words more into that you'll probably hear from Indy, because we've worked quite closely together with a number of people in this room, where I could talk about the finance of that, I could talk about other parts of the social transition. But I am one of those doom and gloom people, but in a really hopeful way, because I think that, the scale of the transition we need to make is vast. And if we pretend otherwise, we are going to be joking ourselves, we're going to be kidding ourselves, we're going to be closing our borders, we're going to be letting people drown in the sea. We are going to think that if we just look after ourselves, everything will be okay. And I'm not in that space. I really do believe as leaders, we have a responsibility, stewards of this work, to be honest about the scale of what needs to happen. But this question really interests me, and I think Melissa's work and the work of so many incredible people demonstrating are starting to show the early shoots of this. And why is that okay? Well, I think that is fucking excellent. Sorry for the swearing. Hey to everyone. Oh, there might be some kids watching. Sorry about that. I think these demonstrations are so excellent because I'm one of those people that was mentioned at the beginning that funders often say, hey, is that actually possible? Really? Come on, is it viable? Is it possible? And I'm kind of never really interested in that question, Because I don't think any of the huge transitions we've ever made happened because the first person who came up with the idea had every bit of the governance, finance, technical, every bit of that transition sorted. Actually, what they did is start to build small islands of coherence, and I've learnt that from lots of people in this room, incredible people, Alistair Parvin, Indy, Melissa, many of the people that I grew up being able to watch them work. Because we've done this before, right? We've done this over and over again. When we built the NHS, we didn't just build the big system of the NHS or huge hospitals, we built neighbourhood GPs. Those neighbourhood GPs were inspired by the medical aid societies that were popping up way before the NHS. And yeah, whichever side of politics on, you're going to say who the person who came up with all of this is. But there's no doubt that the medical aid societies were an example of what it meant to start to bring health into the hands of the community. Why did that matter? Because at the time of another massive transition, no Prime Minister stood up and said, y'all need to all get healthy now so we can rebuild the country and become more productive. And everyone's like, oh, okay, cool, what do we do? In their broadcast once a month. We actually understood that you have to build democratic access to the tools, the resources, the spaces, the expertise to be at the forefront of improving your own health. So we built neighbourhood GPs. A short walk from where you lived. When I grew up, 5 minutes from where I lived, it was normal to always go there. Same with the libraries. When we needed to make an industrial to a more knowledge-based economy, we understood it multiple times the ways in which we needed to give and democratically provide access to the tools of learning and knowledge. And it had lots of bumpy starts. A good one here was in 1849 when if people have too much knowledge already, it would be much easier than it was to manage them 20 years ago. The more education they get, the more difficult they are to manage. And for me, these things are really, really important because actually what it's, Melissa's work and WeCanMake and the work of many neighbourhood innovators is pointing to is that these system demonstrators, they might be small, but they're showing a whole slice. They're showing how you might finance it. They're showing how you might roll your sleeves up and get out of it, with all due respect, a place like this and go build it somewhere where it really matters. They're thinking about how you govern. They're thinking about the technology. They're thinking about what it looks like, what it feels like. Policy can be built from there. They're holistic. They're people and ecosystem based. And people like Dan Hill in the book Designing Mission, someone that I really have looked up to our whole career, talks about this really clearly, that these prototypes, when you start to build them into actual coherent system demonstrations, they're really, really powerful, arguably more powerful than writing it on paper and then hoping someone, after you describe the change, will go and make it happen somehow, right? And you can touch and see and you can feel these ideas, and the complexity is all there. They don't get rid of it. Thinking about what you do with land, what you're doing with the finance, what you're doing with people, and all the people politics. God, I can't imagine how much Melissa has gone through on a day-to-day, because I know what it's like to do this in a neighbourhood in Ladywood. And so they're really, really important that we have these demonstrators. And we're working on this in Birmingham, and I just want to share a little bit of what we're doing as I finish to say why I think it really matters. We're working on redeveloping this site, not because I think huge capital projects are the way forward. Right? I don't think that's what we need to do. But I do believe this urban acupuncture that Melissa talks about, that actually, if we are honest about the scale of transition and the crisis we face, all the spaces, our front lawns, our green spaces, our school halls, our empty factories, our GPs, our libraries that are only open a couple of hours a day, these would all be transitioning. Our cultural venues that are struggling would be starting to give democratic access to the tools, the spaces, the knowledge, the data that people need to co-lead their transitions locally. And we've seen this from reimagining the economic system to co-designing the spaces, to thinking about the types of things we might need, from factories to community kitchens to all the beautiful things on these spaces, on this beautiful picture. We know that our neighbourhoods are going to have to transition. They're going to have to provide the tools to people, because we can't retrofit one home every 3 seconds in Europe through the market or through someone setting up a business and that business scaling. It just won't work in an equitable and just way. And this is just some examples of what we're doing and how we're working at a street-based level to look at what it means for a street to govern, own, and to design and lead its own retrofit. And so you can learn loads more about that from, if you just follow the hashtag retrofit reimagined. But my point here is really, really clear. is that actually this small example is not something that just should be scoffed at. And to put all the pressure on someone like Melissa to say, solve the whole crisis, or whether I think that WeCanMake is actually going to solve the housing crisis, or it's going to start to show as part of a whole wave of neighbourhood system demonstrations where they are co-leading the transition, really showing what happens when you put the tools, the resources, the data, the knowledge, the access to space in the hands of the people who live there. That's not the only thing. It's not the street versus the neighbourhood versus the city versus the region versus the nation state. No, it's all of those. But to pretend that we can't do it with deep, deep agency and investment and belief in the scale of the street and the neighbourhood, I think really does a disservice to how we've done this before, when we've built the community libraries, when we've built the GPs, when we've understood that that part of change is arguably one of the most important. It's where you can really start to see what it means for a country to completely change its orientation towards the direction it needs to go in. So I hope that's been useful. I think this work is absolutely excellent and you should get behind it. And if you're a funder, oh my God, you should fund it liberally. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you, Imi. That was brilliant. Pooja, are you up for talking about
following that?
What I'm hoping you're going to talk about is the role of local authorities in all this. Because we haven't really touched on the function of government in helping get these sort of models off the ground. But I'm very struck by what Melissa said, that you would not have achieved this without the support of Bristol Council in quite a lot of quite complicated ways at times. So.
Yeah, so thank you. So, I mean, yeah, super inspired to be here and like Imi said, quite intimidated by the depth of knowledge in this room. I'm going to talk about local government because that's what I know best. I think we often get lost in this top-down versus bottom-up approach to making change. And I guess I wanted to briefly explore this idea of a network approach to change and that scale of transformation that Imi touched on, and it's really about people, isn't it? And within this network of people, I see local government as being a really important middle woman, as it were. And so I suppose what I'm focusing on today is almost 4 requests to local government, a sort of dear local government. First, dear local government, surrender power. Hello. So power comes in lots of different forms. Land is one of those forms. And local authorities own about over 1 million acres of land. And that makes them a significant landowner. So there's a huge opportunity here for local government to give up that land. And it is happening already, and there's loads of interesting examples. I previously worked at the GLA, at the Greater London Authority, and there was really interesting models being explored there of buying land and actually having really, really long freeholds and leaseholds even, and sort of giving up that land and finding opportunities for people on the ground, in the streets, in the neighbourhoods, to take those opportunities forward. So, surrender power. Secondly, dear local government, be an enabler. When you see activism and energy and purpose being driven by activist groups and community groups, that's an opportunity. I know there's often a sort of a shadow of concern of, oh, should we be giving this space, this power to people who shout the loudest? But people are shouting and they're loud, and there's an opportunity there to support them. In local government, there is this incredible opportunity you have of the network of positions and people of power, whether it's departments like DEFRA in national government, whether it's relationships with local businesses, whether it's knowing your residents groups, or whether it's actually, huge infrastructure organizations like Network Rail. You have the power and ability to convene, and actually things just happen when you have the right people in the right room, and you can do that in local government. Use your tools. Again, I know there's someone here in this room who knows a lot about procurement, but procurement can be used as a really, really clever tool to look and suppose in simplistic terms, I suppose, defeat the market, but there's loads of ways where you can create opportunities legally to enable and open up new opportunities. I've seen some really interesting innovation here. I know Tower Hamlets looked at how you can actually get local builders to actually have the kind of first opportunity to work on sites, and coming back to the kind of self-build approach. There's so much here that can be done around procurement and sort of tools of innovation. So use those tools, and that's just one tool. Policy obviously is a huge opportunity there. Communication is a huge opportunity there. Advocacy is a huge opportunity there. So use those tools in a really clever way to be able to make that change. And finally, I guess, be bold. All of these examples are not, they're all happening and happening all over the country. And it's just about how do you enable that to happen at scale. And I do think that geography of scale is important to be able to sort of, that the acupuncture happening at multiple places, it's possible. In times of economic and financial need, I actually think there's even more need and more space to be bold and innovative. And this is the opportunity for that. I do think we need local government to have that courage and that confidence to be able to take that approach. And I suppose that's what we're trying to do at Public Practice, is build the skills and capacity and capability of local government to be able to think about, I think it's about influencing change perhaps, and enabling these opportunities to come to light. So just, I suppose, to end, we need this network of really motivated people driving this sort of change, working in the top, bottom, middle, everywhere. A local government really needs to play their part, and hopefully we're helping them being bold. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pooja. And last but not least, I'd like to invite Indy Johar of Dark Matter Labs to talk to us. Well, it says here, systems change to match the scale of the economic, social and environmental challenges we face. So if you can get that into 8 minutes, I'll be very impressed.
Thank you. Actually, I'm going to be try to be quite tight. Firstly, I'm deeply in awe of what Melissa has achieved and the team has achieved. I've had the fortune to be a collaborator with Melissa for a long time, and I have utmost respect for actually doing real work on the ground and driving change at a policy level. I think it's nothing but brilliant. So I just want to start there. I do also want to use my 7 minutes, 30 seconds on actually why this is critical. You know, I think quite a structural way. So if you take the national carbon budget of the UK, how many homes do you think the UK can afford to build? Anyone done the calculation? Near zero. Actually, if you have very, very good technique, you can get a little bit higher, you can do a little bit, but it's near zero. Let that sink in for a second. So we can afford to build no homes if we want to try to live in 1.5 degrees. So whenever anyone tells you the future is about building homes, just reconcile it with that reality. And that's not just words. That's serious, because it means our theory of actual spatial justice is not going to be built by additionalities on markets. We're not going to solve our spatial justice problem by saying we're going to build a few more homes, even if it's 100 homes, 1,000 homes, 3,000 homes, 30,000 homes, 300,000 homes. We don't actually have the national carbon budgets, the carbon budgets to do this. So, second part of the problem. Who's looked at timber supply over the next 30 years? We don't actually have the material resources over the next 30 years for all the conversations that we tend to have. So when people say, I've got this sorted, I've got a timber solution. You don't. Who's looked at copper supply? We don't actually have the copper infrastructure to build actually the economy that we're talking about. So that's just one part of the problem. Second part of the problem is, all right, how are you going to do justice? Well, justice is not going to be delivered by new homes. It's going to be delivered by the just use of existing materials. the just use of existing materials. So innovation is not going to be about building new stuff, brand new stuff. We're going to have to do additionality exactly like Melissa's doing and Imi's doing, but we're going to have to actually talk about the just use of existing materials. Then the third dimension of the problem. Actually, our homes are effectively slums. You just don't know it yet. So if you look at indoor air pollution, all sorts of other conditions, if you live by a busy road, you lose 2 to 3 years of your life. Indoor air pollution is 5 times worse than outdoor air pollution. So actually what we've got is a housing stock is literally murdering people if you do the numbers. So it's in that context that we have a housing crisis. Don't buy all the stuff about we built 300,000 homes, we solved this. We don't. Then you get deeper into this. How are we going to deliver this justice? What does justice really look like? Who owns future material liabilities? So if you build something, who owns that future liability? How are we going to build that material economy? It's going to change, all of it is going to change in front of us. Our housing, so everyone talks about retrofit. In Europe, we've got total Europe, including the UK, 250 million homes. According to policy standards, we have to retrofit 250 million homes. Guess what? We don't actually have the hydrocarbon budget to do that. We don't certainly have the biomass base either. So when people talk about biomass base, our food systems are deeply vulnerable and are going to actually compromise some of our biomass base to be able to do this. It's going to require structural transition of our land use in hard terms to build the biomass base to be able to actually build towards that economy. Now, I'm not saying this to kind of go, oh my God, shock, doom, doom. I'm saying this because the space of innovation is going to have to radically change. The material economy, the use justice economy is all going to have to radically change. We don't have the old way of doing to solve this. And so whether it's radical infill, using the super lightweight textile materials, we're going to have to radically reimagine how we build spatial justice around the world. And we're going to have to radically improve the standards of our built environments as well. How are we going to do that? We don't have the labor force to do the retrofit that's talked about in policy terms. So I suppose why I say all this stuff is it's really important we start to deal with the structural nature of the problems rather than the myth of the problems. And certainly as an architect, I think one of the things that irritated me the most was actually when architects were given briefs and we thought we'd solve the brief by building a slightly smaller home. We've got this. We'll just make the home smaller and smaller and smaller. And it was a myth problem we were solving. We weren't solving the actual problem. So when we start to look at this reality, I think we're facing quite a different future. And it's structural. And it's going to require us to reinvent property rights. It's going to require us to reinvent the idea of what it means to own a home. And I don't think ownership is going to be on the table. And that doesn't mean state homes, and it doesn't mean actually collective homes. I think we're going to have to look at homes in a completely different way, post-ownership theory. We're going to have to understand that the liabilities generated by homes, which are social liabilities in terms of health outcomes, education outcomes, all the things that Melissa pointed to, they need to be captured and understood at a true cost level. Why is it cheaper to sell you a can of Coke than a sustainable orange? Because the can of Coke externalizes all the costs. The carbon, the aluminium footprint is all externalized. The orange, which internalizes those costs, sustainable orange or an apple, actually is more expensive because by unit costs it's internalized those things. That's the problem with our housing market. Our housing market is currently externalizing all those costs. Social, environmental, and other things. And those liabilities are going on to public books and largely being uncrystallized and ignored. This is a systemic level problem. And without dealing with it, I think what we'll carry on doing is literally murdering ourselves. So I think we have to find a different future, but we have to recognize the structural nature of the transition that we're operating in. And I think that space of innovation has to be a hopeful space of innovation. And I think there is great hope in doing that in radical new ways, recognizing we have to move out the slums of the 20th century, which we're living in. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds back. Thank you.
I think we might all need that 30 seconds just to kind of recover from that, actually. Thank you, Indy. Yeah, Pooja and Melissa, come and join us here. Before I open it out to the floor, there are microphones. I'm looking around the room for them to appear magically. Anyone got a microphone? Yeah, there's one. Excellent. And another one there. So if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand and do so. But please do wait for the microphone. Even if you've got a loud voice and you can project nicely into this auditorium, don't forget we've got lots of people online who won't hear you if you're just bellowing from your seat. So please do wait for the mic. But yeah, let's open it out to the floor. And if anyone has questions or indeed answers to any of the important questions raised here, I'd love to hear them.
Don't be shy.
Indy, I think you've effectively silenced everyone. No, Chris, go on. You can go first. I'll take several first. So if anyone else has a question, please do raise your hand. Chris.
I hate the silence. Chris Brown, no longer from Igloo, now from Climatise. I did some arithmetic, Melissa, on your 370,000 social value and multiplied it by 33,000 and came to a very big number.
What was it?
Just over 6 billion. Do you know how that compares with other ways of delivering housing?
I haven't done the. I mean, we've done the calculations as well, and it kind of broke the calculator. Kind of like lots of E's came up and things like that. Actually figured out how big the number was, and so I think it's really interesting because we do just look at kind of cost per square metre. If we could get a social value per square metre, then that would be really quite powerful. And I think, it nearly broke us doing that social value calculator, because I think when you're trying to build the new, you also have to perform and excel at the business as usual old system as well. So we have to use some really clunky tools, TOM systems that are counting all the wrong things, as well as working with our community members to identify what really matters and what they wanted counting, and then going and find them through the very good hacked system, hacked kind of calculator, and then stitching it all together. So it's, I'm not sure that anyone's properly counting what actually really matters. And I would be really interested to see how our per metre square social value kind of stacked up to kind of mass volume house builder. But yeah, I'd love to run the numbers.
Thank you. And yeah, the green jumper there.
Hi, hi there. Patrick Osborne from the Positive Collective and Perpendicular Architecture. Melissa, we've worked a little bit together, and what was really fascinating when we did was not just about retrofit, but also about better fit. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that and how it ties in as part of the bigger picture.
Yeah. Ask some other people some questions as well, please. But on that, yeah, I think we are kind of trying to think about this kind of opt-in densification kind of approach and seeing how it could work for bigger sites as well, so that I think when housing development happens, it feels like it's always for other people, and you don't feel like you can afford the homes that are being built in your neighbourhood. And so what's the value for anyone of the development that's down in their neighbourhood is really hard. And so we were thinking about if there could be a better fit. And actually, the man who's sitting next to Chris Brown, he's run the numbers on this and some things in London. So, and it's thinking about if you do manage to build the homes that are kind of some additional homes, kind of elders that can downsize into the home, then that releases some additional capacity there that a new family could move into that. So you actually get, if you're building the right homes that people really need, you can actually get a much more value, much more kind of payback from that because you're building capacity. Chris, do you want to talk to that?
So on the estate we did, we increased the number of homes on the estate by 10%, and we solved the housing needs for the entire estate. So it was 265 homes on the estate, we built 27, and we solved the housing needs for 100 families.
Yeah, that's the kind of multiplier. If you get this right at the hyper-local level, that's the multiplier you get. And it's almost kind of like the best green home is the ones that you don't have to build, and that's releasing the capacity in what we've already got.
Thanks. Tom Chance from the Community Land Trust Network. I think this question's for Imi. I've talked about it a bit with Melissa, but I'm interested in others' thoughts. So a lot of the playbook here is the technology, the legal arrangements, all the rest of it. But I think a really key part of it, obviously people have spoken about, is Knoll West Media Centre and Melissa. And I'm interested, Imi, in your experience, maybe with Ladywood or elsewhere, about in places that don't have that social infrastructure and capital in place already, what's the playbook to kind of generate that or help communities take control of it? Because it's really clear it wouldn't work if it was top down. You wouldn't be able to do the acupuncture to get people's consent for the infill and so on. And most of our members, it's kind of people putting their hands up, but I'm always interested in how can we do this in places where they aren't doing that yet, but there's definitely a place for starting that kind of initiative in those communities.
I guess I don't have all the answers to that question quickly, because there is then a layer at which policy, at which we understand as a wider field, where there might not be this type of infrastructure in a place, but there are tons of other types, right, that can be repurposed, that can understand itself differently, interplay together. And that's why things like the work that we're doing with DM on retrofit is really interesting, because we don't start from a point of we're going to do this big grand thing. We start from the point of what does a warmer, a cheaper, safer to live in home look like, and how does that conversation start? And that starts in a very different place. But what I would say is that there is, from the experience we've had, even when we built the Impact Hub, that nobody goes backwards after they've been in a factory and built this for the first time. Nobody goes back and says, you know what, I'm not gonna do the next thing, I'm not gonna do the next thing. And so the playbook for me around the sharing and the spreading is on many different layers. It's on this practical layer of skills, tools, ideas, this work we're doing together. It's another layer where we move and we collaborate across fields, much more deeply, much more quickly, much more rapidly. And then at the third layer, which is that larger policy and the landscape of what we're moving into now. For me, we keep getting called to all sorts of different spaces. What does this mean for the arts and culture space? What does this mean for X and Y and Z? And I think I keep coming back to this fundamental piece that unless all of us, wherever we are, including this bank and this building, starts to understand itself, its resources, its assets as part of the transition, that we're going to really struggle. But the last thing I want to say on this is that in every community, in every place that we've worked in, or in spaces where we've moved from the city centre and now we're in Ladywood, where there is basically everything's gone. We haven't had a building for 3 years because of COVID. We have popped up in front gardens. We've popped up on the corner of a street. We've been part of hundreds and hundreds of people's organisings in different ways. The Jubilee Street Party had a whole retrofit strand on it. So I would just say to not overly just think about the examples where we do now have all of this, because actually in every corner, in different ways, childcare is being organised, and understanding these different spaces where these conversations can come up and the organising can start to happen, I think is really, really crucial. But yeah, I don't have a straight playbook for that unless we start to really talk about policy and about the actual conversation we have in this country about the scale of the challenge that's coming, rather than just kid ourselves that we can just carry on as we are, and hopefully we'll just kind of shut our borders and be okay ourselves. So yeah, it's a bit of a complex one. But I would just say, if you think that it's not happening on your street or in your place, all of us live somewhere. All of us live somewhere. We can organise the 20 houses on our road and start talking about these issues. And arguably in a room like this, the level of privilege would mean that we can actually expand that quite quickly.
Okay, can I just expand that question out to the rest of the panel here? How do we inspire this sort of action in places that don't have a Melissa or an Imi agitating and making it happen at a grassroots level?
I can add a very quick thought. we do need to solve the nicest possible way, Melissa. You're strange. You've got superhuman levels of persuasion and charge that make it all happen. We do need to solve for the average. We need to solve for the normal. We need to solve for the normal guy or girl setting up a CLT who's not you. The good news is, our towns and cities and streets and squares are largely composed of replicable patterns. So actually, we'll say our individual place is unique. In some ways, obviously it is. But actually, the things that spatially make it up aren't normally, or very largely aren't. So I think that the game in town is working out, yes, the processes and the land ownership, but also, you know, the modules that you can build, the things you can slot in, the way you source it, and getting back to having a proper value chain of things that are manufactured or purchased or fabricated that are available to self-build, custom-build, small local groups. Some of them will be smart, some of them will be stupid, and most of them will be somewhere in the middle. And it's that we need to get back to, and we haven't got to yet. But I think there are starting to be the hooks there. But that's the real win, is when we normalise this. But we're not there yet.
Can we get a microphone up here at the back?
Yeah. No.
Anyone else want to come in on this point?
Yeah, it's just on that. I think we've got, I mean, the thing what Emmy's brilliant at doing at Civic Scare is making it feel like everyone's invited to this. And so wherever you are on kind of development path, you are, you know, there is a tangible contribution that you can begin to make. And I think, you know, there's a point that, you know, Pooja, you talked about kind of local versus council, community versus council, and that's not actually the game in town. Like what we've done in Bristol would not have been possible without a really creative collaboration with the city council there. And that's like, you don't hear that often, like planners being innovative and experimenting, but that's exactly what they've embraced and done.
There are horror stories out there.
Yeah.
We're getting a double microphone. There are horror stories out there. I won't recite them now.
But
there are horror
this
stories.
isn't a horror story. This is a beautiful story. And I think there's lots of kind of frustrated revolutionaries trapped in bureaucracies that want to do this kind of stuff. And, you know, let's create the spaces and the invitation to invite all of that in.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's very much what, you know, we really believe in, is that people, when planning is really about improving people's lives, it should be. And, you know, as is so many architects, they went into doing that because they wanted to improve or like help people and live a good life. So yeah, I do think people over time, and there's lots of reasons for this, you know, austerity being kind of has had a huge impact on local government and what people are able to do in terms of the amount of, you know, planning budgets have been cut by whatever, 40, 50, 60%. And so we've gone to this place where planning is seen as like a restrictor, and hence this is actually that it should be completely the opposite, where it is an enabler, and hence that conversation of we need that spark to like, there's a lot of power that local government has to be able to support that kind of energy and movement. And I actually think there are lots of really interesting things happening on the ground in lots of different councils and places across the country. So it's just how we see that as how we learn from that. And I think we're not very good at sharing good opportunity, sharing good practice, and I think Nicholas pointed on that before. It's like, how can we like share that this is actually happening a lot? It's not unique. It is, but it isn't. Like actually, we can all do this in some way.
Brilliant, thank you. We have a question here.
Hi, thank you. Actually, my question follows on from that conversation. Sarah Chilcott, I'm formerly a trustee of the Northwest.
Even less.
Okay, can you hear me? Good, okay. So my question follows on from that conversation. I'm Sarah Chilcott. I'm formerly a trustee of Knoll West Media Centre, but I'm actually currently Managing Director of Planning Portal, so very interested in the planning conversation. And it strikes me, Pooja, you talked about local authorities being bold, and we've seen an example of that in Bristol, but I'd be interested in the panel's thoughts on how policy could support better these kind of schemes. What would you ask of policymakers?
Anyone want to take that?
Yeah, so, I mean, what we've done, we've proved you can do this without any policy changes. But my gosh, it could be so much easier. We've kind of, we've got a playbook as part of this, and in that's got kind of 6 asks. That, you know, if government was so minded, it could really, really enable just by a few tweaks. So, like, for example, one of the things that we're calling for is a community-led urban exception site. So an equivalent to the rural exception sites to really kind of like get the barriers out of the way to enable more communities to do this. And then the other stuff is just like, there's quite a kind of risk-averse culture in local authorities and a fear of challenge. But actually the tools are already there. It's almost like a sense of permission. It's okay, you can do this. So even a clear statement from government saying it's okay to dispose of land of not best market consideration, so long as it's below 2 million. You can do this at social value. or you
Which is
can,
clearly established,
yeah.
that is legal to do that.
It is legal, but it always feels like a secret that every community group has to discover.
But it's worse than that. Sorry to
persuade
interrupt. Just, again, I won't name the council, but I can think of a chief financial officer at a council who knows that it's legal, but still doesn't bloody want to do it because he just doesn't think it's the right way of managing the economics of his council. So the problem there ain't the law. So sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a culture, and it's a sense that we can do this stuff, and the kind of letting go a bit. So it can be so much easier if other people want to kind of adapt and adopt these things. It could be much, much easier.
Nicholas, is there a role for the Office of Place in enabling this sort of?
I'm not going to answer. There is, of course, there is. No, but I mean, can I just do one more direct response? Then kind of I mean, I could talk about that for hours, and I promise I won't. But let me give you an example which is live right now. And again, I won't say where, but we create streets, social enterprise I run. We're currently using a mechanism that was created 10 years ago, just over 11 years ago now, called neighbourhood development orders, which have sort of failed. They haven't really been used. They actually create a mechanism for a parish council or a neighbourhood forum, a publicly convened group of residents locally, essentially to grant themselves planning permission with the permit of a planning inspector. The reason they haven't been used is you just need a huge amount of work up front, and it's just been hard to get the cost or the brilliance to do that. But what's interesting, and again, that's why we're not so we're doing one for a parish right now. In a prosperous part of the home counties in the green belts outside London, we're finding so many infill sites in this town you'd think would be completely built out 30 years ago because it's on the tube. The council is really nervous of allowing us to do a neighbourhood development order with no signed-off qualifications in reserve matters, which they could legally do. And we're showing them how it could be done. We've got the budget. They just don't want to give up control. So I think there's a key concept, rather than giving us a technical answer, of councils need to learn, and we perhaps need to help them, and probably government needs to help them, but to bring the democracy forward and be comfortable setting clearer standards and where those apply. You can build, if you've got local community support, these backfill houses in these places. And we'll step back and let you do it. You've got to apply building regs and that type of stuff. We're not saying to build a matchbox. But that confidence to set clear rules and then step back and let it happen and let 1 million people be the creators of the flowers of our new homes, I think that is very vanishingly rare. And that almost cultural challenge, and there are lots of ways we could then do it, is the bit, I guess, that we're trying to get at.
I do have one more geeky policy thing, if that's the appetite for a geeky policy thing. Yeah. So there's at the moment in the Levelling Up bill that's going through, there's a change in that that proposes that 25% of SIL, community infrastructure levy, should go to parish councils. If you just enable that to also go to kind of urban kind of community land trusts and neighbourhood forums in urban areas, that would be really revolutionary and get a stream of kind of revenue funding into community groups like ours that's not reliant on grant or other things. I think it's really interesting, on the edge of Knoll West, there was a kind of a more conventional housing development, £31 million, had about £1 million worth of SIL. And if we'd been able to get 25% of that, that would be, 275k that our community could really use and see the value of the development. In fact, we got exactly zero. And there was no value of seeing what that massive volume development kind of could bring to our community. So that's going through kind of Parliament at the moment. So a little change just to expand it to include urban areas could be revolutionary.
Do check out the playbook. There's a whole section on policy changes that could help in this area. We've got one more question here, and then I think, do we have online questions as well? Yes. Okay. So last question from the floor. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Is that on? Yeah. So I wanted to pick up on Indy's point about materials and the carbon embodiment, the embodied carbon in materials that we're using. So I work for a sort of community housing support organisation based in a small coastal community. And we've been experimenting with materials like hemp and clay and other things. And yeah, I just wanted to sort of, because obviously you've listened and watched about WeCanMake using sheet materials, which is a byproduct of the timber industry, but you're saying we haven't got enough timber to be building enough houses, even with the spare material from that. So what do you see as the future in terms of the materials that we can be using, and how can it integrate into these kind of modern methods of construction that are being used?
Yeah, if you want an honest answer, I think it's better fit. I think we have to find, and we're going to have to talk about circular use of existing materials, and we're going to have to talk about better fit of our existing housing stock in really radical terms, because there isn't the base level infrastructure on that other side. And I think, so I think we're going to have to thereby then talk about things like ownership. Like if you have a house and it's not being used and you're not using that embodied material and carbon energy, there should be a cost to not use, right? So I think we have to start to drive a different economy and a different type of ownership, responsibility of ownership, not just the kind of benefits of ownership in driving that densification of use and capability. So I think we're going to have to go, and timber supply will pick up over time. We will increase that, but it will take time, is what I'm saying. And our carbon budgets aren't there. And if you look at our retrofit reliabilities, we don't have the base to do what Arab call the carbon BERT, to do the retrofit. And I think, and this is what I think the scale of it, right? So I think there's, if you say it's at least 50,000, maybe it's less, 30, 35,000 for a deep retrofit of UK homes, and you look at the number of homes, you're talking trillions, right? So, and that's also the part that I think we should just be honest about, because I think that there's an honesty required for us as a civilization to talk about what the scale of what we're about to go into. We're going into almost a post-war rebuild of Britain. I know people don't want to say that, but that's where we are. And it's not going to be rebuilt in a material sense. We have to find new ways of dealing with this economy and this conversation in a radical way. And I think there is a politic to it, not a big P politic, but there is a politic to it that I think we have to be honest with. And if we're honest with each other, I think we can deal with it. That's the other part. Like, I don't want to live in narratives that there's many, many experts, Stephen, Chris, who will sort of tell you the details behind this. We've run the numbers as well. There's some honesty, and the honesty means that we'll innovate in the right space. That's key, right? We'll innovate in the right space, and we'll allocate to the right things in that time.
Amy?
Can I just build on that a little bit? Because I think that's what I was referring to with Melissa's demonstration, which it might not be that the exact process of the first two houses is what is going to be the radical innovation, right? A mixture of the honesty with which we need to be within, but also the actual what happens when people in their places want to listen to, have nobility, have access to tools, agency. This will start to create and unleash a whole new layer of innovation that we yet haven't experienced. I haven't in my lifetime in this country because of so many things to do with many different things, which I won't bring up now. But and just one other thing is there's probably different pathways that this panel thinks is the future. And I just want to add one thing, which is I think important to say. Like, Britain does have a history of believing it can do whatever it wants outside of the paradigm of what justice and equity looks like for the global south, right? So I obviously spend a lot of time with Indy, and I spend a lot of time watching people go, bleh, right? Like, whatever, we'll be fine. We'll find a way at any cost, no matter who drowns in the sea or no matter who has an impact as a result of our actions. And I want to say that is not just a radical activist movement that needs to be pressed down so that the real people who run the country can get on with some big stories, right? There is great, diligent, brilliant work happening like Centric Lab, who are actually putting numbers on the cost of that poor quality of housing, who are doing sophisticated, brilliant work with communities. And we've worked with them over the last couple of years. And I'm telling you, when you take the data, this story, to the streets of Ladywood, which we did this summer, hundreds of neighbours from all different backgrounds far more resonate with, it's not really possible, is it? Or that in Bangladesh, my family are, or way more than they resonate with someone saying, we'll just do it if we just do this, standing on a stage somewhere. So I just want to say, if you're feeling cynical, get out to the people, especially the diaspora who live in this country. Give them democratic access to knowledge, data, tools, and watch what happens. Hear their stories of colonisation, hear their stories of carbon budgets, of well, how's that practically going to happen? And watch, they start to say way quicker than any of us do, hold on, what? How are we going to... And I just think that there's something really important, because we are in central London, that when you feel a bit like, Go to people like Centric Lab, look at how they're inspired by indigeneity, look what happens when everyday people have access, and just take a look back, right? It's not okay for us to do the chest beating. We'll be fine no matter what. It really isn't. And if we do, then that means that we're going to do it at the expense, just like we always have. And then we've got a question of our hands about whether we're really talking about equity and justice. And I just need to say this because I spend a lot of time in that kind of sitting next to him and people being like, ugh. But it's not really to do with what he's talking about. For me, it's really to do with this history of what the honesty is about. And if you decided that you don't care about that, and that's where you're heading, because your politics is about a certain thing, then take equity and justice out of your mouth. Because you cannot put these two things together. And they're not just buzzwords that we just throw around. They're real things, they're real stories, they're real people, they're real countries underwater, they're real material budgets. And we have to be really honest about that. And that isn't to your question, it's more like a wider piece about, well, what do we think about this? Just get those words out of our mouths then, and get the global south out of our souls if we think that we can just carry on as is, because I just think that's a real responsibility on all of us.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm aware that we've got online questions as well, and obviously people aren't waving their hands from the audience because they're online. So can we just hear from some of our online guests too?
Sure. We've got a question online from Rosie, which is a technical one from Melissa, maybe, which is what makes a site work or not work?
Cool. Do you want to ask a couple, and then we can scoop them up maybe? Yeah, sure. There's a kind of more general one about how can we share this with our local council, which is maybe a kind of more for the whole panel about these whole processes. And then maybe another slightly more technical one about fuel poverty being an issue and what are the levels of insulation and air tightness, just particularly on the WeCanMake homes.
Okay, so we have what makes sites work, fuel poverty, and local councils in this. Melissa, do you want to go first?
So kind of like, following the kind of Office of Place, we've got a design code which sets out the kind of like viability checks that we go through to kind of work out whether a site is going to be viable or not. So that's going to be on our website to kind of download. There's also an invitation there to sign up to some in real life workshops that you can come down to Northwest, find out, get really kind of hands-on with what we've done and try it out. And I think this is that kind of open invitation to kind of like come and find out more and really work out together about what part of this model that we've developed could spread and what is most useful for people.
Any other final thoughts, people, before we wrap up? Because I know that there are drinks waiting for us. We're out of time. Anything else? In which case, I think we'll just say thank you very much to Melissa and everyone from Noel West, and particular thanks to Nationwide Foundation for funding this amazing project and for hosting us all here today. And thank you very much to the rest of the panel. Thank you.